Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling, well, a truly massive navigational challenge. We're going to try and decode the information superhighway of the central nervous system.
We really are. We're diving right into the spinal cord to map out all those sensory and motor tracts.
And the scale of this is it's mind-boggling. The textbook uses this analogy of planning a complex trip, and it really fits.
It's a perfect analogy. I mean, think about it like a nationwide shipping network. You have millions of sensory neurons, those are your incoming trucks with afferent data, constantly giving you updates.
And at the same time, millions of motor neurons, your delivery drivers with efferent commands, are heading out to adjust everything.
Exactly. Everything from big movements to the tiniest changes in muscle tension. It's a system in constant motion.
And what's incredible is that the names of these highways, these tracks, are basically the map. They tell you everything you need to know right up front.
That is the #1 shortcut for anyone trying to learn this. So listen closely to this rule. If a tract name starts with spino, it means its journey begins in the spinal cord.
And it's heading up to the brain.
Right, so it has to be sensory or afferent information.
So spinocerebellar, that's going from the spine to the cerebellum. It's sensory.
Precisely. And the reverse is true for motor commands. If the name ends in spinal, it starts up in the brain and heads down to the spinal cord. It's a motor or efferent signal.
Like the vestibulospinal tract. That starts in the vestibular nuclei in the brain and goes down to the spine.
You've got it. Understanding that one prefix-suffix rule is like getting the key to the whole map.
Okay, fantastic. So let's unpack this. Let's follow the traffic in first, the ascending sensory tracts.
And to really understand these, you have to get this concept of the 3-neuron chain, especially for any sensation that's going to reach your conscious awareness.
Right, it's always a chain of 3. So what's the first link?
The first-order neuron, that's the sensory nerve fiber itself. It's the one out in the field that picks up the signal and brings it into the CNS. Its cell body is tucked away in a dorsal root ganglion.
Okay, so that one brings the message to the door.
And at the door, it stops and passes the message to the second-order neuron. This one is like the central relay station. It's usually hanging out in the spinal cord or the brainstem.
And then if the message is important enough for, the CEO to hear about it.
I like that. Yes, if it's headed for the cortex, that second-order neuron travels up and synapses on the third-order neuron, which is almost always in the thalamus.
The thalamus. We've called that the gateway to the cortex before.
And it really is. It does the final sorting. It figures out the nature of the sensation. Is this pain? Is it pressure? And then it sends it to exactly the right address in the cerebral cortex.
And speaking of addresses, the entire system is built on this weird principle of decussation.
Ah, the great crossover, yes. Sensory information from the left side of your body has to get to the right side of your brain, and vice versa.
It's non-negotiable, but the key detail is where that crossover happens. That's what defines these different tracks.
Exactly. But before we get to the specific routes, just remember these fibers aren't just a messy bundle. They're highly organized.
I thought the medial lateral rule was so cool. It's like a seniority system for nerves.
It's just pure efficiency. So nerve fibers that enter the spinal cord way down low, say from your foot, they get to travel more in the middle or medially inside that sensory column.
And the ones that get on the highway later, like from your arm.
They have to travel on the outside, more laterally. The lower fibers get that central lane because they have the longest trip to the brain. It's just good traffic management.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, let's hit the big ones. The high-definition route, the posterior columns.
Yes, or the dorsal columns. This is your precision pathway. It's carrying super localized info-fine touch, knowing exactly where your arm is without looking.
That's proprioception, right?
That's conscious proprioception,
Wow.
plus pressure, vibration. This tract tells the brain the what, the where, and the when with incredible detail.
And it's so organized, it's split in two. You have the fasciculus gracilis for the lower body, below T6.
And the fasciculus cuneatus for everything at or above T6, so the upper body. And these axons, they just shoot straight up, uninterrupted, all the way to the medulla oblongata at the base of the brainstem.
And that's where they finally cross over.
That's the spot. They synapse in the medulla, and those second-order neurons immediately decussate, cross over through this fiber bridge called the medial lemniscus on their way up to the thalamus.
Okay, so remember that. Posterior columns cross in the medulla. Now let's contrast that with the other big one, the spinothalamic tract.
If the posterior columns are your 4K Ultra HD signal, the spinothalamic is more like a crude sketch.
Ah, okay. And what's it carrying?
Pain, temperature, and just crude poorly localized sensations of touch and pressure, and its crossover point is the big giveaway.
It crosses right away, doesn't it, as soon as it gets into the spinal cord?
Immediately. The second-order neurons synapse in the posterior gray horns and cross over in the spinal cord right at the level they entered. They don't wait to get to the brainstem.
Okay, so that's a huge clinical difference if you damage the right side of your spinal cord.
You might lose fine touch on your right side because that posterior column tract hasn't crossed yet.
But you'd lose pain and temperature sensation on your left side.
Exactly, because that spinothalamic tract already crossed over way down low. It's a classic neurological puzzle.
Wow. Okay, there's one more major sensory player, the spinocerebellar tracts. And these guys are the rule breakers. They're not for conscious thought at all.
Not at all. They're all about proprioception, muscle, tendon, joint position, but their destination is the cerebellum, our subconscious coordination center.
So they just bypass the whole system for consciousness.
They do. Their job is to help automate and refine your movements so there's no third-order neuron, and they completely skip the thalamus. It's just a direct internal feedback loop for smooth movement.
All this organized input has to end up somewhere. It creates this physical map in the brain.
It does. It creates the sensory homunculus, the little human. And if you were to actually see this thing, it would be a bizarre, distorted figure.
The lips and the tongue and the hands are enormous, right? And the torso is tiny.
They're gigantic. And the reason for that distortion is so important. The amount of brain space a body part gets isn't about its physical size. It's about the number of sensory receptors packed into it.
So our lips are just loaded with sensors, so they get more brain real estate.
A huge amount. And this mapping is so precise. Even though only about 1% of all this data reaches our conscious mind, the structure makes sure it's accurate. The thalamus figures out what it is, and the cortex figures out where it came from.
And when that where gets messed up, you get things like referred pain.
The classic example in the source is a heart attack. The brain isn't used to getting pain signals from the heart, so it gets confused and mislocalizes it as pain coming from the left arm.
Fascinating. Okay, let's reverse the flow. Let's look at the output side.
Yeah.
The descending motor tracts, the commands going out.
So when we're talking about controlling skeletal muscle, the somatic system, we switch from that 3-neuron sensory chain to a much simpler 2-neuron motor chain.
And those are the famous upper motor neuron, or UMN, and the lower motor neuron, the LMN.
Right. The UMN starts in a CNS processing center, like your motor cortex, and it can either excite or inhibit the lower one. But the LMN, its axon, goes right out to the muscle fiber. It's the final command.
The final common pathway.
That's what they call it. And a crucial point, the LMN can only excite the muscle. It can only say contract. It can't say relax.
Okay, so the main route for me deciding to, pick up this pen, that's the corticospinal system.
Also known as the pyramidal tracts. This is your conscious voluntary control system. It starts at those big pyramidal cells in the primary motor cortex.
And as this massive bundle of axons travels down, you can actually see it on the front of the medulla. They form little bumps called the pyramids.
Yep, and that's the spot. That's the site for the main motor decussation, the motor crossover. But it's split.
Right, it's not all or nothing. About 85% of the fibers cross over right there in the pyramids.
And those form the lateral corticospinal tracts, which control most of our fine voluntary movements.
But the other 15%, they just keep going straight down.
They do. They stay on the same side as the anterior corticospinal tracts, and they only cross over at the very end, right at the spinal segment they're going to control.
And we should probably mention the cortical bulbar tracts here, too. They're part of this same voluntary system.
Right. They're just for the muscles of the head, face, and neck, chewing, moving your eyes, all that conscious stuff.
And just like the sensory side, there's a map. There's a motor homunculus.
Another distorted little person. But this one's distorted for a different reason.
It's not about sensors, it's about control.
Exactly. The size of a body part on the motor homunculus is proportional to the number of motor units involved. So things that do really fine, complex movements, your hands, your tongue, your face, they look massive because the brain dedicates so much control to them.
So we have this amazing conscious system, but so much of our movement is, well, subconscious. We have a whole backup system for that.
Oh, an absolutely essential one. Clinically, it's often called the extrapyramidal system. It handles all the stuff we don't think about: posture, balance, reflexes, and it's constantly talking to the conscious pathways.
Okay, let's just quickly run through the 4 big players. First up, the vestibulospinal tracts.
Their job is one thing: balance. They get input from your inner ear, the vestibular nuclei, and they're constantly tweaking your posture and limb position to keep you from falling over.
The body's autopilot.
Right.
and the tectospinal tracts.
Think startle reflex. They come from the tectum. You see a flash of light or hear a loud bang, and these tracts make you automatically turn your head and raise your arms. It's pure reflex.
Okay, and the reticulospinal tracts, they sound general.
They are. They come from the reticular formation, that big network in the brainstem. They just sort of regulate overall muscle tone and basic reflex activity, like helping to coordinate your breathing.
All right, and lastly, the rubrospinal tracts, coming from the red nuclei.
Now, in humans, their role is pretty small compared to other animals, but they're important. They mainly help flexor muscles and inhibit extensors, especially for fine control in your arms and hands.
But there's a hidden talent there, right?
There is, and the sources really highlight this. If your main motor pathway, that big lateral corticospinal tract, gets damaged, the rubrospinal tracts can actually step up. They can become a critical reserve system, helping to preserve some motor function.
That's incredible. And speaking of loss of function, this brings us to a really important clinical note. Amyotrophic Lateral Sclerosis, or ALS.
Yeah. ALS is just devastating because it's so specific. It's a disease that attacks and destroys only the motor neurons, both the upper and the lower ones we just talked about.
So you lose all motor control, weakness, muscle atrophy.
Complete loss of voluntary movement over time. But the tragic part is that the sensory pathways we discussed, and all intellectual function, they remain completely intact.
It just perfectly highlights how separate these systems really are. Okay, let's try to put this all together. Let's talk about the levels of somatic motor control.
It really all comes down to timing. Let's use the textbook example. You touch a hot stove.
Okay.
For that signal, ouch, hot, to travel all the way up that 3-neuron chain to your cortex so your conscious brain can process it, that takes time. Milliseconds, but still, time.
And in a survival situation, milliseconds are everything.
Exactly. You can't wait for a conscious decision. So an interim command to pull your hand back right now is issued instantly by a neural reflex.
And that's happening way down at the spinal cord or brainstem level.
Right. It's a rapid, automatic, pre-programmed response. Its only goal is to preserve homeostasis, to keep you from getting hurt.
So there's a clear hierarchy of control. At the bottom, you have these simple, fast reflexes.
And as you move up to the medulla, the cerebellum, and finally the cerebral cortex, the motor patterns get more and more complex, more variable, more thoughtful. But here's the kicker. No matter where the command comes from, a simple reflex or a complex thought, they all have to go through the lower motor neuron.
It's the final bottleneck for every single command.
It is.
So what does this all mean? When you boil it all down, this information superhighway is just all about meticulous routing.
It is. Every sensation is mapped, every command is segregated, whether it's fine touch crossing high up in the medulla, or a pain signal crossing immediately in the cord, or that motor command splitting 8515 in the pyramids. The body is constantly optimizing the pathway for speed and for its final destination.
So the difference between a life-saving reflex and a voluntary action is really just about where on this complex, crossed-over map the decision gets made.
And how many synapses create that processing delay. And, given what we see in systems like the rubrospinal tracts, the fact that they can essentially reroute and help maintain motor function when the main pathways are damaged, what does that reveal about the brain's potential? What does it tell us about its inherent capacity for plasticity and rehabilitation after a major injury?
That is a fascinating thought to end on, the sheer adaptability of the human nervous system. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the information highways of the spinal cord. We really hope this roadmap serves you well.
It was a pleasure. We appreciate you tuning in. And on behalf of the whole Last Minute Lecture team, we'll catch you on the next deep dive.